So welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Lorai and I'm the program director at the Interfaith Center at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And at the Interfaith Center, our mission is to invite people from diverse secular, spiritual, and religious traditions to participate in one another's practices in order to cultivate appreciative understanding and friendship. We seek to unify people around common moral, social, and ethical concerns in order to build a more just and equitable society. So tonight, we are here with Kim Ogle, and we're going to be talking about the grief that we have suffered collectively and individually from COVID-19. So I want to introduce Kim to you all. Kim was a funeral director for over 20 years. She earned a PhD from Miami University from the Department of Sociology and Gerontology, where she was awarded the Postdoctoral Fellow with the Scripps Gerontology Center. There she developed a curriculum regarding end-of-life care for certified nursing assistants who work in long-term care facilities. In 2019, Kim earned the certification of Death Doula from the Conscious Dying Institute in Boulder, Colorado. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Jessica. It's good to be here, and thank you all for joining us. I hope that it makes you think a bit, just being a little thought-provoking, and I also hope that I can teach you a little bit and make you aware of the grief that we are experiencing, not just here in the United States, but also worldwide.
Right. So let's start first by talking about talk about some numbers.
Yes, okay. Yes,
Okay. Here. Yeah. It is.
There you go. Okay. We've been doing this Zoom stuff for so long, we're still not experts at it, but okay. So I wanted to start just to take a look and think about the enormity of what is happening, not just here in the United States, but also worldwide. This was as of October 18th, which was yesterday. This came from the New York Times. In the United States, we have suffered 726,000 deaths. Okay, and in my research and from some of the experts in grief and bereavement, we believe that for every death, 9 people are affected in some way or another. And so if you multiply 9 times 226,000 people, Jessica and I, we did that. It ended up with over 6.5 million people.
6.5 million people
are somehow affected. And that is just from the deaths of someone. That's not even thinking about the numbers of people that have been affected because of loss of jobs, being isolated, which is just horrendous for older adults. So it's just astounding that numbers of people that are suffering some type of grief here in the United States. Our 7-day average right now is almost 1,900 deaths a day. At one point during the peak of COVID-19, over 3,000 people died daily. That is like having 9/11 happen every day for weeks on end. That was a huge, those of us who remember 9/11, and we were astounded at the number of people that died in that one day while that was happening daily for weeks at a time. And I want to point out that while here in the United States, we have suffered a great deal, but worldwide, there have been almost 5 million deaths, 242 million cases across the And we, being who we are in the United States, we often keep our little blinders on and we don't think globally as much as we would, I think, what we should do. That's a lot of people. And to think that 643,000 deaths happening over a 7-week period. It's just incredible. And we're not done with this. Now, it would be one thing if we were saying this is the end, and now we can rebuild and move on and start getting better. This is still happening, and this is still happening. I particularly picked out those two photos to go with these two slides. There's an artist that did a project in Washington, D.C. And at this point, there were over 600,000 deaths. And so he put a flag, he had people volunteer and put names on each flag to represent the 600,000 people that had died in the United States so far. It's pretty astounding because I don't think we can wrap our head around how many people that is. We just can't. And for people like us and for myself, I will say this, I'm a white privileged woman that live in a pretty cozy, insulated area in southwestern Ohio. And so, yes, I have known people that have died of COVID, but not to the extent that has happened in large cities and metropolitan areas, even in Cincinnati, Ohio. So it's not been as horrific as it has been many others. So I want to talk about some of the features of COVID death that may be different than other deaths and why it might be causing a little bit more difficulty in grieving. And maybe now at this point might be the time to just kind of talk about what grieving is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure as a funeral director, you are well versed in grief. So yes, well, how would you define grief?
Grief, and I will tell you, I also hold a couple of certificates in thanatology, which is the study of death, dying, grief, and bereavement. And so for many years, the thanatology area believed that real grief could only be experienced after the death of someone. Because after all, someone dies, you can't replace them. I remember one of my professors while I was getting my certificate said, that it's an isolated grief definitely can only happen after it dies. But that has changed and it has evolved like all areas of study. We understand now that losing your job, losing your identity, going from being partnered as a wife or a husband or a domestic partner, or that can be just as devastating as it can be through divorce rather than through death. Losing your job can be just as important. So there are all these non-death losses that can occur. And grief can also manifest itself in a number of different ways. It can be an emotional reaction to loss. It also can be a physical reaction to loss. So anytime you have a loss that's significant in your life, there is a chance that people will grieve. And it's also important to understand that grief is individual. I may grieve much different than you, Jessica. Everybody has their own way of grieving. And we try and pigeonhole people, but that may not be correct. And we need to allow people to grieve in their own way and for as long as they need to grieve. We in the United States tend to think, okay, we lost something or someone died, and we'll give you maybe a month. Now let's get on with your life again. It's time. In the corporate world, many times you're given 3 days and back to work. And grief can be debilitating. And there is a difference between sort of normalized grief and complicated grief. Some of the experts are thinking that COVID-19 might be causing more and more complicated grief, which means that a year out, longer than a year, you may still be somewhat debilitated by your grief. You may not be able to talk about the loss without falling to pieces. And it may be that people will then slide into chronic depression. And so, I think it's important that we recognize that we may have a lot of people that are grieving that may turn into chronic grief, which is a much more intense and difficult grief, something that may take a long time to get over, which may then slide into depression and pathological depression. So we need to be aware of them. Okay, so the 4 features of COVID-19 deaths that may cause some of this difficulty. The first one is just the suddenness of the death. It could be that, you're fine one day, the next day you start feeling bad, and 2 days later you're in the hospital on a vent, and you may die the next day. Families have a hard time putting their head around that. It's just like sudden death. It's very difficult. It's so not unusual for families. The last time that they see their loved one is as they're taken in an ambulance to the hospital, because we aren't able to be with them because of COVID-19. It's so much harder for survivors to wrap their minds around the reality of death when they can't actually see that person or understand what is going on, and actually being able to process and seeing the grief and acknowledging the reality of the grief is very essential to the grieving process. Okay. Also, the need to distance. I mean, that's part of COVID, right? We can remain 6 feet apart, although we're probably not at this point, but I'm vaccinated, I know. And family members were not allowed to be at the bedside. I know someone that just about a week ago was dismissed from the hospital. He had not seen his daughters for 22 days because he had been isolated in ICU. That lack of contact with people is difficult. You're just not allowed to be with the person to say goodbye. And technology, you have to learn how to say goodbye to your loved one by using cell phones and iPads. And that was the best that we could do. It just causes difficulty. It's hard for people, again, to see the reality of the death and not be able to really process what's happening. Okay. Move on to the middle. Not want to do that. Okay, help me, Jessica.
Okay. There we go.
There we go. Okay. More than one. My goodness. There's a possibility in families, and I've read and heard of families that have lost multiple people, family members in the same family. So you're worried about, who's going to be next? Who got sick? Who might be the next person to die? And this can lead to bereavement overload. You just have that much grief in that short a period of time. It's just overwhelming. And it may be that you have to shut down, you totally numb out, you have no feeling, you are just like a robot going through the day. You just can't do that. It's just too overwhelming. And then the preventability of the disease, you might become angry and have heightened anxiety because You don't know who caused the illness, or where did it come from, who in the family may have caused the person, your loved one, to get sick. Where did they go? What did they do? It's very anxiety provoking. And am I the next person? Am I going to be the next person that gets sick? And it's a very difficult situation. So all of this may cause people to have a harder time grieving than a so-called normal death. All these different circumstances. See if I can do it the right way this time. Well, no, let's get rid of it. There it is. Okay. That one. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, other challenges to COVID-19. That's the loss of the life that we once knew. You know, you're grieving because we may never go back to the life we once knew. So people are grieving that we just don't know. We don't know. We think that things are getting normal, but they're not. We might have a new normal. There are shortages of things going on right now. I mean, there are over 200,000 cargo things out in the West Coast, and so our shelves are empty. Can we get that when we go grocery shopping? How does it do we wear a mask? It's a whole new way of doing things. You know, do we wear a mask everywhere we go? Do we not wear a mask? Now, are you going to get vaccinated? Do we not get vaccinated? These are all very important questions, and it's changed our lives. Sometimes I'm a big sports fan, and I'm seeing all these people going to games, and I'm thinking, but why would I be comfortable doing that? Right, you know. Worry and anxiety, there's still so many unknowns, and we don't know if we will be flying. It is difficult getting on a plane. You want to do that. We've seen such an increase in violence, and I believe that all the violence that we've been seeing and the unrest, part of that is people are grieving. Part of it is that people are grieving and they don't know what to do with it, and they don't know how to, and they may not even know that they're grieving, because we don't label that. If you lost, you know, your vacation, you lost your vacation. Okay, it's something you've been planning forever. Where does that go? Where does that anger go? You know, and it might be a trip of a lifetime, and that you have a right to be sad about that. You do, and people don't think about that. We only equate grief with death. And I think that we need to, you know, much like the field of thanatology, open it up to all those other losses. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a sector of society for whom this is probably the biggest event that's happened in their life. So I kind of almost see this loss of innocence, that everything seems so perfect, and now what do we think? What are we in danger? And those underlying feelings of insecurity that I think are coming from all of these things, from losses of jobs, losses of family, loss of freedom for many people. There's just layers and layers of loss. So I can see the societal effect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have not put any labels on that, and not that we need to, but I think if we understood that part of what people are experiencing is grief, we might have a more tender heart towards that person instead of being so angry all the time. I think, you know, if we understood that people are grieving, I mean, think about the anger that is seen at school board meetings over mask requirements. I understand that. Part of that is fear, obviously, for their kid. Part of that is, you know, I think part of that is they're grieving the loss of what was a normal school. You know, what was it like for their kid prior to? The parents are afraid, and they are grieving that loss, that the kids can't have the same experience that they used to have.
Yeah, it's almost as if we want our kids to experience the same things because that's part of the culture. So what's happening to our culture now? Are we even in danger of losing that and parts of it? And so I can see again the building one thing upon the other, and it's complicated. And then with children, the social interaction of school and how socialization is linked to overall well-being, and the way that we express with our facial expressions, grief and loss can affect all of these things and create a real instability that if it isn't acknowledged, it can't be dealt with. So thank you again for helping us have this discussion.
I mean, I really do think that a lot of it and you know, change is constantly happening. You know, I don't know what it would be like to be in the school system right now, because one day you have one set of rules, they change it all the time, and it's just difficult to maneuver that. The same in the workplace. I was working at Miami when Miami University here in Oxford, Ohio, when COVID hit, and it was like, oh my gosh, now what are we going to do? How do we do this? And it changed. For the first 3 weeks, it was constantly changing. The rules were changing, and the same is happening out in society all the time. We don't have that stability that we used to have, and it's hear all that. And I'm going to try and okay, and just the physical, emotional, mental exhaustion. There's no doubt people are either working or being on high alert all the time. You know, if you lost your job and you're out looking for a job, and you're afraid because you're afraid to go back to work, because you don't know whether you're going to be safe. And again, we've never had this before in our lifetimes, where you feel unsafe to go out and get a job. And so that so much of our identity is wrapped up in a job. So then that causes loss of identity, as well as loss of income. And so you need to grieve all of that. It's just, and mentally, you know, if you have children, if you have grandchildren, it's a constant worry. And then those for people that are providing the care during the pandemic, it's just overwhelming for them. I think that we need to, you know, not just the teachers, but the healthcare providers, and we're talking anywhere from the certified nursing assistants to the secretaries, all the way down. We have to stop and think about how all of this is affecting them, and how that affects you. You know, as you maneuver through the world, when you're used to having more staff, maybe at the doctor's office, the shelves more full at the grocery store, because they don't have enough stockers to stock the grocery stores. It is, you know, all of these are little teeny tiny losses. And there's a phrase, a term called secondary losses. So if you have a big grief, say you lose your job, that's maybe the big grief. But the secondary losses are the loss of relationship with your coworkers, the loss of income that ripples down to the rest of your life. Maybe you had commuted on a train and you saw the same people on the train. You no longer have those relationships. All of that combined into the difficulty of why grieving can be so hard to overcome. Okay. Finally, what can we do and what do we do? I think it's important for us to name our grief and say it out loud and tell people, look, I'm struggling with this. You know, we as a society tend to keep ourselves bottled up, and we don't want to share with other people, especially grief, because, you know, grief means sadness, and we don't know what to do when people become emotional. So you don't share it with people, so you suffer in silence. And I think it's really important that we name the loss, you know, and and not feel badly because you are grieving something that is not a death. And we think, oh, my grief isn't, you know, this person lost their loved one. So how can I say I'm grieving because I can't take my dog to the park where I saw my friends every single day? And it's okay. You can't, that's where you are. That is your grief, and it's okay. You need to acknowledge that you're struggling with that. It's important to do that. So I think we need to own what we're grieving, and we need to assess where our body is. What are we doing? Are we eating well? Or are we kind of not eating so well? Some people are emotional eaters. You know, some people are emotional non-eaters, but we have to stay healthy. If you can, get out and get some fresh air. Movement helps us. And just give yourself a break. Just take a break. I know we have gotten so used to, you know, working from home. And working from home, you went to an office and you worked 8 hours a day. Well, working from home means that maybe you work 11 hours a day, 12 hours a day, because you just can't stop checking your emails, or you continue to get something from your boss that you need to work on, and it's 8 o'clock at night, and you just got one more thing that you need to get done. But you need to take a break from that. Totally take a break from that. Okay. I'm trying to look at I need to move this kind of. Yeah. Okay. Yes, your mind. I think it's important that we prioritize what's important to us and simplify what's important to us. You know, try and get your life down to the basics. There's always something that you can add on, and we tend to do that. But let's try and simplify during these difficult times.
By simplified, what do you mean by that? Are you meaning in your day-to-day living, or in your mind, the way that you're thinking, or all of it? Or what would be an example of simplifying it for you?
For myself, and I tend to do this. I tend to schedule appointment after appointment, and continue to do that and try and squeeze it all in one day. Okay. And I may only give myself 15 minutes to get from point A to point B and try and be on time. I have said, okay, I'm not doing that at this time. I'm only going to schedule 3 appointments for myself during the day. I try not to do things in the evening so that I have my evenings. And so instead of scheduling 6 appointments in one day, I'm able to say, look, I can't make it that day. Because normally what I would say, especially because I meet with people who are grieving, and normally they need some help. And so I then will say, okay, is it possible that I can meet with you on another day? Rather than doing that. In my mind also, I try, and I tend to ruminate and think all the time. So I try and do some meditation, some quiet breathing, just to take some air in and relax a little bit. I make sure that I have time for my dogs and my goats and for my animals.
For them or for you?
Yeah, that's all for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these sound like almost two simple questions, but the reason I'm asking is because I've noticed that since the pandemic happened, there's been a movement towards simplifying.
Mhm.
And initially, my thought was that it was because people realized the fragility of life as we know it, and that it sort of was like a recognition that, I wasn't really living life exactly the way I wanted to be. And now that I see that things can be gone in an instant, I'm going to make sure to prioritize what's truly important to me. And it didn't occur to me till just now that part of that simplifying might just be coping mechanism to deal with stress. And I think that's interesting and equally, if not more so valid, a reason to really look at, why do you need 5 appointments in a day?
Right.
We've all slowed the train down just a little bit, it seems like, and people aren't quite so frantic about making it to all their appointments exactly.
Right.
I've just noticed a little bit of that, of a slowing down. So
yeah, I think that, we have not, we as Americans is more. We got to do more. We want more. This is, I've seen this, and even in myself, I'm totally guilty of this, but I think that we need to, you're right, take it down a notch. Because life is short, and I think this definitely helps us realize how precious life can be, and in a heartbeat it can be taken away. And these are just things, materialistic things, and we don't need all of that. And it's difficult to do. I in no way want to say, oh, well, that's a simple thing to do, just do this. And maybe financially you can't afford to do that, and I understand that as well. But if at all possible, try and slow things down for yourself. Try and find some quiet time. And spirituality, I think this is a big part of the grieving process. If you are religious, I think now is a good time to embed yourself in your religion. If you are not as religious but more spiritual, what do you find spiritual? Is it a walk in the woods? Can be very spiritual. Find that piece of otherworldliness that brings you peace, and that can help you through all of this. I think all of that is very, very important. What inspires you?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times I know I'm kind of in the world between religion and spirituality with yoga. It's some of both, depending on how you practice it. But a lot of times people think that it's a luxury to take time off to go a little deeper into your study or into your practice or into whatever education about your faith. Maybe it's reading, maybe it's a silent retreat, maybe it's listening to speakers, but really dedicating some time to that instead of it being a luxury. Make it a priority that every day I'm going to connect with that part of myself that is not affected by the pandemic. Yes. And it's there. And again, it might be in nature for some folks, or through art or music or whatever it is that fuels your heart and spirit. Make that a priority for your mental health.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. These are trying times. They really are. They're trying times for all of us. And I think the more that we can be in tune to that, is the better we can cope with them. And I think, I truly believe that we have a nation that's grieving right now, and that's not being recognized.
And I think too, I know that I'm sitting here thinking that this sounds like sadness, 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 more sadness, more sadness. Let's pile it on top of more sadness. And I think that it's what you just said is important, because I'm sitting here getting really uncomfortable with how much sadness we're talking about, thinking, okay, how do we turn this into a feel-good program? It's our tendency to push through grief in that way. And so it's okay to take an hour and talk about the sadness. Is there hope? Yes. You know, I mean, there are positive things coming out of this in lots of different ways. But to always be trying to push and say we should get over it now and move on. We are moving on whether we want to or not. So that's not something we have to try to do.
Too, the one, you know, and I as flawed as it is, I mean, this pandemic certainly shone a bright light on our medical health care system. And I hope that we can learn from this, and so that we can make it better. Because again, you know, the inequity of who this affected is glaring. And so I'm hoping that that's one thing that we can now correct, that we see that. And I do believe, you know, there is another side of grief. There always is. And we are a resilient people. And I think that's what is the exciting part of it, is we know that we can get beyond this, and hopefully we'll be better. Better people for that. So yes, definitely. Let's hope that we can have some changes in who this affected, and go from there.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yes.
Do we have more slides?
I think that's the last one.
Okay, we can. Yeah, let's go to our chat and see. Okay. So if anyone has any questions, feel free. You can unmute yourself if you would like, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you either way. If anybody has any questions, even if you don't have a question and you would just like to share, maybe share your story and some of the things that you've experienced during the pandemic, that maybe some others will relate to, that would be fine too.
Hi, Jessica. Hi.
Hi, Fatima.
How are you? Did you see? I think the sound for me is not very clear. I don't know about other people.
It's just the volume is low.
Yeah, sometimes it goes away. Like maybe I thought maybe the guest is away from the laptop. Yeah.
Okay.
Now it's clear, but when during the slides, it was like the sounds goes away sometimes.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, I would like to share a few, like just something very quick. I experienced the grief in another way. My son is an immune compromised, and for now, like almost 2 years, a year and a half, like he did not go out at all. Like, because we have to be extra careful with his immune system being so low, and so even his friends, like he keeps in touch with them just by social media, by texting and phone. He can't go out and to the public and like meet was like, and because of that, just because of his feeling, and because if we do not want to leave him alone at home, we do the same, the whole family. So since then, we did not eat out. Since then, we did not go to any big crowd. Since then, we did not, even this past summer, I saw many friends and neighbors, they went vacation. They took vacation. We did not since the pandemic happened. So, like speaking about the grief, you can experience the grief in many different ways. We try to do in our backyard. We try to do like simple things, like just barbecue, stay out for like our, especially now these sunny days and low temperature is nice to be out. So we try to do some, but still we still deal with the effect of COVID. Like I think, yeah, and still for another few months until we feel safe enough. But this is another way. I mean, if you ask people, everybody, like they have their own story, how they deal with it, like losing people, or just in my case, my son is immune compromised and being young, by the way, he's very young, 22 years old. So imagine for almost 2 years, even like he has to see his doctor routinely, like every 3 months or so. He did not see his doctor in person since then. Like, yeah, he meets with him in Zoom and that's it. Like everything being online for him, classes online, friends online, everything is online.
Yeah, and it's interesting with that. I know in studies of my own personal study of trauma and how the vagus nerve works, a big part of it, it has to do with, they call it a biopsychosocial system, or a biopsychosocial model, and that your physical body and what it's doing directly relates to the emotional aspect, but it also affects when you are in a heightened state of anxiety, it also affects your ability to socialize, and that those signals to and from the brain go both directions. So if you're cut off socially, that's going to affect everything else too. So even just the social, having to be quarantined had such a huge effect on everyone. And it translated for some into physical illness and all sorts of things. So it's definitely all connected.
Yep, definitely. And some grief experts are saying that what people are experiencing during this COVID has caused them to have the same grief reactions and trauma reactions as if the person that died was had died from homicide. So there is a trauma aspect of what is happening to people during this period of time. It's not just that they are dying, but this is a traumatic that lives have changed dramatically. Like you guys being isolated for so long. So that is trauma producing. And that's another reason why that there will be long lasting effects of what we are seeing going on today.
Do we have any other sharings or questions that anyone would like to ask? Someone did put in the comments here that COVID has magnified previous barriers, that childcare, work, being a mother, having enough paid time off for appointments, leaving nothing for vacation, and having children with disabilities makes it harder. I'm sure that would, yeah.
Yeah, this disease has, there definitely is a socioeconomic aspect, as well as a racial aspect of this disease. The numbers are just sometimes, 2.5 times, Black people have died 2.5 times greater numbers than white people. It has also affected lower socioeconomic people because, one, they are the ones that have the jobs that are often the essential jobs that have to go in. I'm thinking STNAs in nursing homes, in hospitals, The restaurants shut down, so often the servers were the people who were the most affected. It's just pointed out so many barriers. And so again, I would like to be hopeful that in pointing those out, we can make some change.
Yes, I hope so. Okay. See, we'll have a last call for questions, comments.
Yeah, another note, the other day I read an article about higher education is calling the offices of disabilities across the nation to expand their services to accommodate more students, because we see the mental health problems increased during the pandemic, especially among college students and I think every age is not just college students, all the students, yeah. But I think it's a good thing. It's a good call. It's a good way to expand the accommodation for students, even attendance accommodation, even many types of accommodation to provide students for extra services to be able to succeed in school and dealing with the effect of COVID. So
Yeah, and one other thing too is that resources, we haven't really talked about what resources are out there. So I don't know, Kim, for grief in general, do you have any websites or local or national?
Yes, yeah. There is a website, What's Your Grief, that does, they have blogs. They also have resources for people. If you go just on the internet, there are a number of very good resources. There are some books that I would highly recommend. Again, we didn't really talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, but there's a gentleman that worked with her. His name is David Kessler, and he has written a fairly new book that talks about the sixth stage of grief, which can be just the idea that it's not just a death, but it can be also loss. So David Kessler is another gentleman that you might want to look up. And if you want a more humorous look at death and grieving and overall life grieving, Nora McInerney is a woman that also has written, and she has written a book called The Hot Widow Club, I think is the name of it. The Hot Women's Widow Club, and she gives you a kind of a humorous idea of what grieving is like, but she also has multiple deaths and multiple losses in her life, so that would be another one. But her name is Nora McInerney. I definitely recommend that. There are numerous websites that cover all different types of grief. If you go online and type in just grief resources, but What's Your Grief is one that I often go to find some short blogs about it.
I know a lot with the pandemic having to be isolated, there are a lot more counties, and I know within our county it was offered more telehealth for seeing a therapist. So if you're isolated and you don't have someone to talk to, reach out to some of your local county and even city resources and see, because they can point you in the direction of free telehealth counseling that can help people to deal with grief and get through this whole thing. So we are resilient creatures. We will make it through and recover. So not to sound hopeless, But it's also, like we said, it's really important to allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, because if you don't, we tend to stuff all that down, hold it in, and try to build a little wall over it so it can't come out, and that can lead to all kinds of problems health-wise, both physically and mentally and emotionally. So find someone to share with if you can. I think it's really important, and hang in there.
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
great. Thank you all.
So much for being here, and thank you.
Thank
Kim.
you.
And thank you.
Yes, have a wonderful night.
Goodbye.
Well,